Welcome to the 1991 Review Channel, specializing in story analysis and reviews. In Part 1, I talked about Han Li's achievements in the core formation stage. In the second part, I will continue to discuss the formidable power of the Azure Essence Sword Art. The second event that demonstrated his combat prowess was a great battle with Tianren, who claimed to be the #1 cultivator below the nascent soul stage. But in terms of divine abilities, Han Li was by no means inferior. This is also another testament to Han Li's combat strength. However, in a record of mortal's journey to immortality, combat strength is related to the main cultivation art, but not entirely proportional. The reason Han Li could fight on par with Tianren was partly due to the profound magic power from the Azure Essence Sword Art, but more importantly, it was due to his magic treasures, talisman treasures, ancient treasures, and precious items, along with the countering relationships between them. In other words, in a record of a mortal's journey to immortality, to win, one must basically rely on a lineup that is both numerous and of high quality. Let's get back to the Azure Essence Sword Art. Previously, when discussing Han Li's achievements in the core formation stage, especially in the great battle with Tianren, he used too many precious items, so the power of the Azure Essence Sword Art wasn't truly prominent. Below, I will analyze from a data perspective the advantages that the Azure Essence Sword Art brought after the core formation stage. First, after forming their core, ordinary cultivators usually have only 1 or 2 magic treasures, whereas the magic treasure of the Azure Essence Sword Art is a set, with a maximum of up to 72 swords. And because the main material of the bamboo cloud swords is bamboo, which can be nurtured by the small green bottle, this is Han Li's home ground. He obtained Heavenly Lightning Bamboo, one of the 3 divine woods, from Ziling, used the small green bottle to accelerate its growth, creating the most ancient golden lightning bamboo which contained evil warding divine lightning, a counter to demonic and evil arts. He used the golden lightning bamboo as the main material to refine the 72 bamboo cloud swords, thereby enabling him to use the evil warding divine lightning. His magic power and magic treasures far surpassed those of cultivators at the same level, allowing him to easily eliminate opponents of the same rank, and even kill stronger ones of a higher rank. However, in the core formation stage, Han Li could not control all the flying swords. Cultivating the Azure Essence Sword Art to the 7th layer, early core formation, only allowed him to control a maximum of 9 swords. The 8th layer allowed for 12 swords, and the 9th layer for 24 swords. Additionally, in the core formation stage, the Azure Essence Sword Art had a unique skill called the Sword Shadow Splitting Light Technique. After casting, each bamboo cloud sword would split into sword shadows identical to the real flying sword. From the 7th layer onwards, each time the cultivation art advanced a layer, the number of sword shadows increased by 1, and their power was also directly related to the cultivation arts layer. Just imagine Han Li in the late core formation stage controlling 24 flying swords and casting the Sword Shadow Splitting Light Technique, with each sword splitting into 3 sword lights, creating a total of 96 flying swords ready for battle. Never mind fighting, just looking at it is terrifying. Although very powerful in theory, in the core formation stage, the bamboo cloud swords were still a bit weak. After all, they couldn't cut through a demonic beast, nor could they take down the single-horned demonic beast, and they were even more helpless in the Heavenly South region. In fact, the bamboo cloud swords were quite wronged, because these opponents were all nascent soul-old monsters. It was normal that the swords couldn't cut them. Furthermore, although the materials used to refine the bamboo cloud swords were excellent, the time Han Li had spent refining them within his body was too short, so their power had not reached its limit. Even so, when dealing with cultivators of the same level, they were more than sufficient. Only after Han Li entered the nascent soul stage was the terrifying power of the Azure Essence Sword Art truly revealed. This is because the Azure Essence Sword Art records a type of sword formation called the Great Sword Formation. The creator of the Azure Essence Sword Art, Qin Yuanzi, added a note for the Great Sword Formation. As long as one masters the sword formation, it is enough to roam the world. But to set up the Great Sword Formation, one needed at least over 100 sword lights, and the flying swords had to be refined with gung metal, an extremely rare refining material. Therefore, after reaching the early nascent soul stage, Han Li traveled everywhere to collect gung metal. In the end, the materials he gathered were only enough to refine 36 flying swords. But these 36 flying swords, after casting the Sword Shadow Splitting Light Technique, could set up a miniature version of the Great Sword Formation. According to Qin Yuanzi's description, after mixing in gung metal, the flying sword should still be azure. However, Han Li had previously obtained a rare refining material called refined metal. At that time, to make the flying swords tougher, he had integrated the refined metal. When Han Li added gung metal to the swords that already contained refined metal, some chemical reaction occurred between the 2 materials, ultimately turning the bamboo cloud swords golden, and they became several degrees sharper. The first appearance of the Great Sword Formation stunned everyone. At that time, the 4th elder of the Een sifting sect plotted to harm Nangongwan and steal Han Li's Heavenly Lightning Bamboo. When the 2 sides fought, The fourth elder suddenly discovered that Nangongwan was a fox spirit and became extremely interested. When Han Li used the sword lights to set up the sword formation, the elder was almost mesmerized. When Han Li reminded him to pay attention to surrounding sword lights, the fourth elder glanced around contemptuously and began to mock him. He said that a life-bound magic treasure needed to be meticulously refined to unleash its maximum power, and that Han Li refining so many flying swords at once was a height of stupidity, and these useless sword lights were just trash. Finally, the arrogant fourth elder said that even if he stood still, these worthless sword lights couldn't harm a single hair on his head. Han Li simply replied humbly, "Though what you said is correct, I would like to ask, fellow Taoist, are you a late nascent soul stage cultivator? If not, then go and die." After Han Li activated the Great Sword Formation, countless golden sword threads rushed toward the center, making the fourth elder feel uneasy. He hastily took out 2 magic treasures to defend himself, but they were instantly shredded by these sword threads. Then, he used his sect's ultimate treasure, the Ghost-Sifting Banner, wanting to rely on the tens of thousands of souls within it to block the attack. As a result, when the beastly souls appeared, these souls immediately became delicious prey. In his panic, the fourth elder threw out another 7 or 8 magic treasures, but they were still instantly cut to pieces. At this point, the fourth elder was finally terrified and wanted to escape, but the Great Sword Formation also had an excellent enemy trapping ability. In the end, countless intersecting sword threads flashed, and the fourth elder's body was cut into 1,000 pieces, truly shattered to dust. At this time, Han Li was only in the early nascent soul stage, while the fourth elder of the Sifting sect was at the peak of the late nascent soul stage. Normally, it is very difficult for nascent soul cultivators of the same stage to kill each other, but Han Li, relying on the sword formation, surpassed his opponent by 1.5 levels and easily defeated the fourth elder. From this, one can see how terrifyingly powerful the Great Sword Formation was. Later, in the Northern Night Small Pole Palace, Han Li obtained a large amount of myriad-year icy jade. Han Li naturally could not pass up this top-tier refining material. After a round of refining, the bamboo cloud swords gained an additional ice-cold divine ability. I imagine that the bamboo cloud swords at this point must have been the ideal divine tool for cutting watermelons. Sturdy, incomparably sharp, and most importantly, they came with a cooling effect. The stronger the bamboo cloud sword became, the greater the power of the Great Sword Formation, at least in the human realm. The Great Sword Formation was nearly invincible. This was still on the condition of using only 36 flying swords to set up the formation. In the human realm, the only time Han Li set up a complete Great Sword Formation was when he faced Old Devil Phone. At that time, Han Li was in the late nascent soul stage, while Old Devil Phone was in the early spirit transformation stage. It's just that the battle was stopped by Ling Yuling before it officially began. Later in the spirit realm, Han Li used the sword formation and even crushed a heaven-reaching spirit treasure, the Blood Crystal Demonic Convergence Ring. I won't list any more examples of the power of the Great Sword Formation. Now, let's talk about how to counter the Great Sword Formation. If you were to encounter Han Li in the cultivation world, how should you deal with his Great Sword Formation? First, the most basic thing is that the Great Sword Formation is a formation made of swords, and setting up a formation takes time. In other words, when Han Li uses the Great Sword Formation, he usually has it set up in advance. For example, when being pursued, he will set up a formation and wait for the enemy to enter. Or he will set it up when the opponent is careless or unable to react in time. As we fought the fourth elder of the Sifting sect, the elder initially looked down on Han Li's sword lights, and furthermore, he was distracted when Nangongwan appeared. In that situation, the Great Sword Formation could be formed stably. Later in the Devilfall Valley, when fighting the Ancient Devil, he also wanted to set up the Great Sword Formation, but the opponent's speed was too fast and attacks were too strong, not giving him time to set up the formation. Therefore, this is one of the few weaknesses of the Great Sword Formation. When facing Han Li, the most important thing is not to give him time to set up the formation. If you can't interrupt the skill and let the Great Sword Formation form stably, unless your cultivation is much higher than Han Li's, you might as well think about reincarnating. The Azure Essence Sword Art in the human realm has a total of 13 layers, which can only be cultivated to the early spirit transformation stage. After arriving in the spirit realm, because there was no subsequent cultivation art, Han Li switched to cultivating the profound Saint True Demon arts. Later, in the land of the Styx River, Han Li unexpectedly met the creator of the Azure Essence Sword Art, Qin Yuanzi. Qin Yuanzi was very surprised to find that Han Li cultivated the Azure Essence Sword Art, but when he looked at Han Li's flying swords, he was heartbroken because they contained too many impurities. If it weren't for these miscellaneous materials, the flying swords would have long reached a point of spiritual connection. After a transaction, Qin Yuanzi taught Han Li the method of tempering the flying swords, and he also gave Han Li the next 5 layers of the Azure Essence Sword Art. After leaving the land of the Styx River, Han Li used the re-tempering technique to temper his flying swords. After this tempering, The bamboo cloud swords directly enter the quantum realm because they possess wave-particle duality, able to switch freely between sword threads and swords. Furthermore, after retempering, the bamboo cloud swords contain even more evil-warding divine lightning. However, although the bamboo cloud swords were comprehensively upgraded at this time, there was one regret, because the retempering process converted all excess materials into the wood attribute, including the gunmetal inside. The bamboo cloud swords could no longer set up the great sword formation. Of course, Hanli was no fool. His willingness to lose a great sword formation was surely because he had a new sword formation to supplement it. The subsequent 5 layers of the Azure Essence sword art contain a total of 2 new sword formations, the Spring Pair and the Azure Disc. It's just that these 2 sword formations, in terms of feel, did not have the same overwhelming dominance as a great sword formation. After all, in the spirit realm, Han Li's methods became more and more numerous. As mentioned before, a lineup that is both numerous and of high quality is truly powerful, so it was difficult for these 2 sword formations to become his trump card. Moreover, because Han Li did not cultivate the latter 5 layers of the Azure Essence sword art, the Spring Pair and Azure Disc formations he set up were slightly weaker in power compared to the original versions. Of course, talking about the spirit realm is a bit far-fetched, because in the spirit realm, Qing Yuanzi himself no longer cultivated the Azure Essence sword art, so it's understandable that there were no stronger moves. But if we only talk about the human realm, the power of the Azure Essence sword art is absolutely top tier. Whether it is a number 1 cultivation art in the human realm is hard to say. Everyone is welcome to share their opinions. I think that the Azure Essence sword art is considered number 1. The profound Saint True Demon arts might be a bit dissatisfied. At this point, some people will ask, what are profound Saint True Demon arts? Is that piece of junk really that strong? If this video gets good numbers, in the next episode, I will talk in detail about the origin and power of the profound Saint True Demon arts. Okay, that's all the content for this video. Thank you for watching my video. Please remember to like and comment to give me more motivation to make new videos. Goodbye, everyone.